Welcome to Caleb Can't Read. I'm Jordan Rabel.
I'm Nicole Rabel.
Is that microphone too tall for you? You look like it's maybe. You can
Maybe.
kind of adjust it. You got to do that thing. So if you didn't catch our last episode, I think you're doing it just right. Don't worry about it. There you go. I'll tighten that bad boy up. Caleb is no longer with us.
Testing.
He died tragically. We are not gonna. Okay, I think that's tight enough. That's good. Yeah, somebody threw a tennis ball into a wood chipper, and he just was not paying attention, so he went for it. Not really much else that we can say about that. Anyway, no, he's still alive. And he'll be with us again. It's just boy's busy, and if you haven't noticed, our episodes are coming out about 2 months at a time. So we're gonna try and placate that by bringing in some other people. So welcome,
other people.
Welcome, my wife. You have always been the other person.
Yeah.
Caleb is my ride or die. Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of beards, you ever fuck a bus driver?
No, I would have to go out into the world and talk to people to like.
Yeah, no, that's not quite your forte. Well,
it is not.
All right. Well, let's get started, shall we?
Yes.
All right. Walter Whitman Jr. was born May 31st, 1819 in Huntington, New York. Same place where The Wonder Years was based.
Ew.
Apparently. You didn't like The Wonder Years?
I was not
that was the
a
one
live action show gal.
That was the one with the tall kid with the glasses, right? With and then the two other kids, there was like another boy and a girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Winnie and such, and
a
whiny, not Fred. Is it Fred Savage or
it was
Ben
Fred Savage?
Savage?
Yeah, no, it was Fred
One
Savage.
of the Savage boys.
Yeah, because one of them grew up to be a fundamentalist Christian, and the other one went on to be in Limp Bizkit. I don't know.
No, Boy Meets World.
No, wasn't there Fred Savage? You know what? It doesn't matter. So anyway, Walter Whitman Jr. was born May 31st, 1819 in Huntington, New York. Walter was the second of 9 children born to Quaker parents, his mother Louisa and his father Walter Sr. It wasn't long before the family started calling their boy Walt to differentiate the two and how the boy would forever be known as Walt Whitman.
Maybe pick different names for your fucking kids.
Yeah, I know.
It's actually a problem with Filipinos.
Picking different names? I feel like they're trying
really similar names.
Well, yeah, how many Johns do you know? There's several. There's dozens.
And then it becomes problematic too for paperwork, but they all have the same middle name because it's the mom's maiden name.
Or in your mom's case, they're all first name Maria.
Yeah.
But they all just went by different middle names. Anyway.
They're not the only family that does that.
I know, and I was just thinking about the other problem with Filipino names is when you try to get real weird with it. And you end up being called Suspiria Johnson or fucking Ben-Hur Torres or whatever.
Literally.
Anyway.
The neighbor we used to have was Ben-Hur.
Yeah. I have a feeling his parents did not know about the gay subtext in that movie. Moving on. Now, when little Walt was 4 in 1823, his family moved to Brooklyn. His father could see how quickly the city was developing from farmland into a sprawling city. So what he would do is spend all the family's cash on a plot of land, build a house, and then try to flip it for a shit ton of money. But rather than make a profit, the family would always end up poorer than they were before because Walt's dad did this multiple fucking times. And every time, the Whitmans would move all their shit into these houses with Papa Walt telling everyone it was really going to work this time, and it just never did. But the elder Walter did keep all these properties in Brooklyn at the very least. So every time they moved to a different side of town, Walt Jr. would get a bigger and better mental map of the city. Now looking back, Walt Jr. said he didn't really have a lot of fondness for his childhood, especially for his father. But one memory he does...
He kept trying to make their lives a home and garden network.
Yeah, basically.
Reality TV show.
I feel like before there truly was a landlord as a career, his dad was out there God. I'm going to bring on the thin beige line. Respect our landlords. Yeah, that was him. So he really didn't have a respect for his childhood, especially his father. But one memory that Walt Whitman does look back on with fondness is in the summer of 1825, when he was 6 years old, and the apprentices' library was being built. There was this huge ceremony for the laying of the cornerstone, which was placed by General Gilbert de Motier, Marquis de Lafayette, who is today regarded as a hero in both America and France. He led Washington's troops in the last major battle during our own Revolutionary War, and then he went back home to France to kickstart the revolution there in 1789. Yeah, so General Lafayette places the cornerstone, and in celebration, he picks up this dirty little fucking kid and kisses him on the cheek.
Ew.
And everyone fucking cheers. Yeah, right? Ew, scabies. Look at that little
I just don't believe in touching
child.
other people's children.
Okay, the way you said it is weird, but I think that it goes both ways. Yeah, it's weird no matter what. Now, of course, that little boy was none other than Walt Whitman.
Oh, no.
Who largely sees this. No, this is his first happy memory, he says.
Oh, no.
He didn't have a happy memory before 6 years old.
That's so fucking sad.
Yeah,
it's the happiest fucking memory. Ew.
I feel like it was more for the attention that he received with
That's
everybody
still
going like,
fucking sad.
Yeah, honestly, that was probably the first amount of affection he ever felt. He's just like, what is this? What's going on? Years later, Walt would even work at the apprentices' library himself. But in 1830, when Walt's 11 years old, his family figures he's had all the book learning he needs and pushes him out the door to look around for employment.
Nice.
He started as a gopher for a couple of lawyers, just fetching bullshit, printing whatever was needed. But then he does the same thing for a local newspaper called The Patriot, under the much cooler name of being a printer's devil.
So is this like, can you remind me of the time? Is this like the Gilded Age kind of era with like factory children, tuberculosis?
Yep. Yeah. You remember that thing that we had to learn in like 10th grade biology about how moths started to get like a peppered pattern?
I had a very different 10th grade biology, but
okay, so in public school we learned about the moths around England, and granted this is in England, but it was because like they started getting this peppered color on their wings, and it was so that birds wouldn't see them against all the smog covered trees.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, so yes, this is very much, it is affecting our environment. Covered children too. Children, yes. Soot covered orphans.
Please sir, I have tuberculosis.
Yeah, just lining the fucking streets, looking to pickpockets everywhere that they can. Pure Charles Dickens time.
I'm just trying to imagine like historical costuming in my head.
Well, but remember, this is like, so he moved about less than 10 years ago to Brooklyn before it was even a huge city. It was mostly farmland at this point, apparently.
Is it like Newsies?
Yes.
The King of New York?
Yeah, although that was like 1900s, 1910s, wasn't it?
All right, this is the 18 whatevers.
It was still, don't worry, Christian Bale was still there. He was still having a terrible little accent. Yeah.
Terrible little accent, terrible little rights for his little terrible newspaper job.
Yeah, don't unionize, folks. It's a fucking scam. So anyway, he becomes a printer's devil, right? And it's basically the same thing. It's just that you're working in the newspaper printing business. Now, in between all his running around for his boss, Whitman learns about typesetting. This is where you place the letters on a board and run ink over them to print on the paper, right? Mm-hmm. It's theorized that maybe some of Walt Whitman's first works were published in The Patriot almost as training for him, and they just let him write whatever to fill up space. That's kind of like how Rudyard Kipling got his start. But in reality, we'll never really know if that was the case. Nobody ever bothered to save newspapers.
It's more like a hearsay.
Yeah, but
Legend has it.
It's a theory.
He was a young paper devil.
Now, unfortunately for little Walt, he'd soon need to find other employment, but not through any fault of his own. You see, his boss at The Patriot was a man named Samuel Clements. Clements with a T. Yeah, he was not Mark Twain.
Ooh, I was hoping for a crossover.
I know. But Clements got a couple...
Literary AU.
Well, Clements got a couple friends of his to help him dig up the corpse of a recently deceased Quaker minister by the name of Elias Hicks.
That did not go where I was thinking it was going to go.
Yeah, usually it's for like stealing money out of the lost and found, but
usually it's embezzlement.
Yeah. Now, he didn't do this, though, for any nefarious reason. Hicks, I know. Listen. Stop. No. Listen. Okay. No.
Necrophilia?
Look, no. But necromancy? No. But no, not for any nefarious reason, all right? Hicks was actually quite the celebrity in New York. Walt Whitman even once heard his oration from a hotel. Whitman said, quote, "Others talk of Bibles, saints, churches, exhortations, vicarious atonements, the canons outside of yourself and apart from man. Elias Hicks points to the religion inside of man's very own nature. This he incessantly labors to kindle, nourish, educate, bring forward, and strengthen." It was a lesson Whitman would carry into his very own philosophy on nature. Hicks was anti-slavery. He said the scriptures caused more harm than good. And he said there was no devil. His teachings actually led to a split in the denomination, and the more orthodox Quakers started seeing Hicks as a sign of the end times. And because the end was coming soon, it meant these people started celebrating the return of Christ.
That's why he dug up the body? Oh my God, is he gonna...
No, not exactly. No. So those are people who were basically against Elias, thought that the end was coming. They were like, okay, so this dude is literally the devil in the flesh. That means that Jesus is coming and is going to ride a literal 8-legged horse down here that shoots fucking swords out of its mouth. That is in the Bible. That's not metal. It is. It's cool as shit. But anyway, so these people, though, that were celebrating this, they called this the Second Great Awakening, and the streets were filled with people that celebrated the end times of Revelation just so that they could spit on all those left behind and ascend to heaven. Like, they were just really like, fucking grandma's gonna get it bags. Now. Yeah, they're like, grandma is gonna see. That old bitch has this coming. So, the Second Great Awakening is actually what got Emily Dickinson into religion for a little bit. She saw all the people in the streets and shit, and she was like, man, you know what? Jesus is kind of neat. Let's read more about this. So anyway, Walt Whitman's boss loved Elias Hicks, and he wanted to show his love by digging up his recently buried corpse and making a plaster of his head before he started decomposing. It was just a death mask, right? What?
I think fandoms are toxic.
They really are. It's always been this way.
It's always been this way. Technology has just made it worse.
Yeah, sometimes you bully Rebecca Sugar online, and sometimes you dig up a man's recently decomposing corpse to make a little head. Yeah. Well, so Samuel Clemens and his friends got caught. I don't know how far they actually got. I looked it up everywhere, like were they caught trying to weekend at Bernie it, but like I couldn't find anything. And Clemens was forced to leave the Patriot. And because of that, his printer's devil was out of work, too. He
probably just went, 5 miles over into the next town and started a new paper.
Yeah, he dropped the T, called himself Samuel Clemens, and started writing. So Walt Whitman is about 12 or 13, and he starts working for another printer. He's doing well enough on his own that by the time his family decides to move back to his birthplace of Huntington that same year, about a 40-mile journey, he decides to stay in Brooklyn. He is a preteen. And remember, this is before inflation really fucked everyone out of a livelihood. So he gets his own place, gets a job at a conservative newspaper called the Long Island Star, and by the time he's 16, he's going to the theater, he's joined the local debate club, he's even started publishing the first poems we know of his in the New York Mirror.
But did he fuck?
I don't know. God damn it. Why didn't I look that up?
What a nerd. I'm going to live on my own. I'm my own man at 14, 15 and making my own money. I know what I'll do. I'm going to go to the movies and join debate club.
Actually, joining a theater, he probably did fuck. Yeah. And at 16, in May of 1835, Walt Whitman moves downtown to carry on his work as a typesetter. Though by the time he gets there, there's this huge fire that wipes out basically the entire newspaper printing district of New York. Like, they put all the printing factories right next to each other, and one fire takes them all out.
Fuck the mainstream media.
Yeah, Bill O'Reilly's just out there writing his next book.
Killing the printers.
Yeah, killing printers.
Killing newspapers.
That guy likes to kill shit, man. He's what a monster. So exactly 1 year later, Whitman gives up on trying to find work of his own and decides to move in with his family that's now living on Long Island. That's right. He was able to live on his own for a fucking year without a job. Anyway, so he takes up a teaching position, but quickly finds out that it's not for him. And soon, Walt moves without his family back to Huntington. Now, in all the years Walt Whitman has worked in the printing business, he figures he knows the game well enough that in 1838, at the age of 19, he decides to found a newspaper of his very own called the Long Islander. But when I say he founded the Long Islander, I mean he was the only employee. He was the writer, the editor, the publisher, the printer, and even hand-delivered the newspapers all by himself.
Blogger?
I'm sure that there were crazies like him before. But
also,
he did this shit for 10 months before he ended up selling his business. And today, the newspaper is actually still around, reporting on news around the Huntington area.
Wow. Is his dad still flipping houses at this point? Because I thought they moved back to Huntington, but randomly they're like, actually, we're in Long Island. Come on through.
I feel like maybe that was something that he probably... I really do feel like he was like a true landlord, and I'm wondering if he was able to just kind of live in one of his dad's properties. But I don't know for sure. That would explain why he went a year without a job in fucking New York City.
That generational wealth, man.
Yeah, for sure. Well, by the summer of 1839, Walt Whitman used what cash he made from selling the Long Islander to move back to New York City, this time to Queens. But Walt was quick to move out, and supposedly, he said he'd never return. Now, maybe he did say this, but as of today, it seems to be rumor. Partially because he did return to Queens. He actually vacationed there all the fucking time. But it seems like he did harbor a hatred toward that part of town for at least a little while, and people began to speculate why. Some say he was tarred and feathered. Some say he was chased out of town from a local preacher that accused him of being a sodomite. But I mean, does it need to be dramatic? Like maybe he just got mugged. Thanks for that. Yeah, no, now that Caleb's not here, maybe we'll be able to finally use the buttons. That fucking sucks.
Fix it in post.
Yep. In 1842, the 23-year-old Walt Whitman would publish his very first novel called Franklin Evans, or The Inebriate, A Tale of the Times.
The Inebriate.
I know. Found my Suicide Squad name. It was what was called a temperance novel, basically a story about the evils of alcohol. The title character, Franklin Evans, moves to the big city, only to become an alcoholic, but finally bettering himself by the end of the novel. Now, the thing is, Whitman was not against the consumption of alcohol. He himself was not a big drinker, once saying he didn't have his first taste of anything stronger than beer till he was already 30. But there were plenty of stories around this time getting published that were part of the temperance movement. Walt wasn't jumping on the bandwagon per se, but instead he took the opportunity to say, yeah, alcohol is bad, but it's not like we need a prohibition or anything. If you're an alcoholic, you can do better. I believe in you. But either way, because Franklin Evans was technically part of the temperance movement, the book went on to sell around 20,000 copies and was seen as a big success. Ironically, Walt Whitman wrote Franklin Evans during a 3-day drinking binge. But you know what? Some critics saw that Walt was lenient on alcohol and alcoholics alike and tore into him for it. For instance, one guy found the line, "Oh, fatal pleasure," should have really been, "Oh, fatal alcohol," if he was serious about the temperance movement at all, which he wasn't. But this led to Whitman's...
Just a job.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a gig.
But this led to Whitman's first bouts of criticism which he always took very, very hard. What?
That's how you know he's a real artist.
That's right, because he's a pussy. And it's perhaps because of this that Whitman wouldn't write another novel for the next 10 years. Instead, he'd contribute to a handful of magazines, becoming a freelance poet, and even writing some short stories along the way.
All right, so you've been doing this for a while now with Caleb.
Uh-huh.
How many authors did you cover that were like alcoholic pieces of shit? Because it seems like quite a lot of them.
Yes.
I feel like, do you think it's easier to name the ones that weren't alcoholic?
God, it fucking feels that way. I mean, let me go off of just the first season alone.
Oh, boy.
So let me think. Casanova, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Osamu Dazai, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Ayn Rand, probably, but like...
Wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, she seems like
She's
kind of
got
a
her
wine
own
slut.
defects.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Harper Lee, no. I don't think, anyway. Let's see. H.P. Lovecraft, no. He was extremely teetotal.
I mean, it would be mentioned if it was that bad.
Yeah, Walter M. Miller Jr., we don't have a whole lot of information about his life, but I know that the tragedies he saw in the war were really, really hard on him, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Would not be surprised if he self-medicated.
Dante, fucking probably not, but maybe. I don't know. Hard to say. Let's see. We got Anne Frank. Yeah, she was a fucking skis.
What?
Let's see. And then we have Edward Abbey. Yes, absolutely.
I think I remember that.
And Marquis de Sade. Yes, 100%. So
fuck
that's
that
like
guy.
that right there in the first season alone is like at least half of them, but like yeah,
It
no,
felt
a
like
lot,
more.
a lot. I mean, come on, Charles Bukowski, fucking Rabelais. Yeah, no, they're Chaucer even. I think Chaucer was getting. I think it was Chaucer that was getting like paid by the king in like a gallon of wine a day or something for like years. What a lucky dude,
I would open
you know?
up my own like mini bar.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. But yeah, call it just like the King's, I don't know, the King's Cup or some shit.
Ooh, King's Cup.
Yeah, oh man, I haven't played King's Cup in a while.
Oh.
Well, I'm also not 20 anymore.
You had friends to play games with.
Anyway, so in 1848, when he was around 29 years old, Walt very publicly takes a stance against his boss, who didn't want to talk about the slavery issue in his newspaper at all. Walt, on the other hand, was passionately opposed to it, so the guy just up and fires him. And just because I thought it was funny, at this time, the people who were against doing anything about slavery were called hunkers. Like, they wanted to hunker down on not doing anything about it. But eventually, this group split, and there were those that wanted to find common ground among those on the other side of the political aisle and those that didn't. And those that did were called softs, and those that didn't were called hards. And the hards were led by a man named Dickinson. I just thought you would appreciate that. So anyway, Walt Whitman, if anybody hears crinkling, our dog is trying real hard to get our attention, but we have a thing to do. So anyway, Walt Whitman decides that while slavery may never be abolished, maybe he can help fight against its spread to other states. So he becomes a delegate of what's called the Free Soil Party. And I am going to massively simplify this.
No, I remember that from like elementary school or whatever.
I remember hearing it. And so anyway, I'm going to massively oversimplify this for people who have no idea.
Please massively oversimplify for me.
Yeah, so the Free Soil Party was against the expansion of slavery because it would take away jobs from white people. And while Whitman himself didn't believe that to be the case, he became a delegate to the Free Soil Party just to prey on the fears of people who thought that would happen, just to help fight against slavery, all right? Now, in 1852, editor of the New York Dispatch, Carlos Stewart, began looking for something to drum up subscriptions. He figured he'd publish a story in his newspaper that could be serialized, so he puts out an article asking if there's anyone out there who wants to try their hand at being a novelist. And of course, he gets a fuck ton of letters, but one from a guy named Walt Whitman stands out. Mostly because after saying that he's out of work and would like to publish with him, he says, quote, "My ideas of salary are very moderate."
Hell yeah, go with that guy.
Yeah, the idea that Whitman would work for very little was, of course, a driving factor in Stewart's decision. But when he investigated Walt Whitman's career, he found that he had already published almost 200 short stories throughout the years, alongside names like Edgar Allan Poe and Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Know that guy.
After that, it seemed like a no-brainer. So Whitman starts serializing a story in the
underpaying this guy.
Yeah. But he's asking for it, goddammit.
Classic bad boss move. I love it. I don't actually love it. But...
I remember when a dude came like door to door and like knocked in. He was like, "Hey, do you know anyone looking for work?" And I was like, "I'm looking for work." I was like fucking like fresh out of high school or something. And he was like, "Come on down to our seminar tomorrow." And I did. And I was the only guy there. And the guy was like, "So, okay, we don't pay you a wage, but what we do is you sell a bunch of knives or whatever the fuck it is." Like, I don't think it was Cutco, but it was something like that. And they were like, "So you sell bullshit. And, you know, if you have a bad day, but your partners are doing great, you take a slice of the pie." And if you're, and I was like,
oh my
yeah,
God.
exactly. And I was like, bro, this is
you could be your own boss.
I was like, this actually feels legitimately illegal. Like, even if I signed a contract, I'm pretty sure you have to pay me a wage. This feels like a fucking scam. And I knew, but for whatever reason, I was so nice. I stood through the entire hour-long meeting, just me and this guy. And then I was like, okay, well, doesn't sound like it's for me. So thank you very much for your time. And like I left. And it was 5 minutes in that he told me like, okay, so here's the bullshit part that most people leave at. And I didn't leave because it was awkward. And then he was like, oh God, I got him. So then he continued to like orient me through the entire rest. And I was just like,
his time wasted as his fucking punishment.
That's true. You know what? Good on me.
Fuck that shit.
So anyway. So Whitman starts serializing a story in the New York Sunday Dispatch called Life and Adventures of Jack Engel, an autobiography, a story of New York at the present time in which the reader will find some familiar characters.
Can we pause for a second?
Yeah.
Nope, you don't have to actually pause. I did want to ask a question for my own understanding.
Yeah.
Contextually, this is pre-Civil War, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Civil War started like 1864? Or 1860? I think it was going 1860. It doesn't matter. But yes, whatever. 1860s.
So I don't even know if this is like Gilded Age shit. This
is
like Industrial Revolution stuff.
Yes, I use Gilded Age as a factor for like things in England is what I recall. But I don't. I know that it was worldwide, but I don't remember when the fuck it was for America.
Because the people that made Downton Abbey...
Gilded Age, I thought, was like 1910s, 1920s.
Maybe.
I think so.
Maybe not the 20s. The 20s were Roaring 20s. But I don't know.
Fuck, why do we have to come up with a stupid fucking...
I don't know.
Remember
I'm
the
just
Skibbity 2010s? Like...
No, stop. If anything, it's like Indie Sleaze or whatever the fuck.
Indie Sleaze?
Yeah, you know, everything's Zoe Deschanel bangs and
Garden
cloth
State
and like faux vintage clothing.
No, Garden State and the Shins.
Twee.
2000s. Yeah, Twee. There you go.
Yeah, Twee. No, just because it's America too. The people that made Downton Abbey went to HBO and made a show about social climbers in the Gilded Age.
Yeah, but isn't Downton Abbey like World War I?
Yes.
Okay, so I think
World War I going into the 20s.
Yeah, so that's Gilded Age, right?
No.
Oh, okay. You know what? I don't care.
I just wanted to know for my own context of the information you're giving me.
Gilded Age timeline, time period. There you go. It started in 1877. So 1870 to 1900.
So
is roughly
like
it.
Post.
This is
Civil War.
This is pre. Yeah.
Gilded
it happened
Age.
post Civil War. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So.
All right.
So this story that Whitman did, Jack Engel, it had a very distinctive style, which, if you knew Walt Whitman's works today, totally made sense for him. The sentences would sometimes run on, sometimes be abrupt and short, and kind of sounds like the prattling of a drunkard. But back then, it was a little too free-form for the masses, so people just didn't bother with it. It's not like it was bad, just that no one cared to even pick it up in the first place. The novel itself was completely forgotten until a student from the University of Houston named Zachary Turpin found it in 2017.
Oh.
It's apparently very Dickens-inspired and kind of fun. But the fact that no one seemed to be paying attention to Whitman's work meant that he was seeing himself less and less as a novelist, and so he would abandon fiction altogether. Now, about 8 years before this, in 1844, the great essayist Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Hey, I know that guy.
Yes, yeah. The AU. He wrote an article titled The Poet. In it, Emerson said that poets were needed in the world to represent its beauty. Yes, but locally, a poet is needed to represent the beauty within their own community. And because the world was ever-changing, the poets would be the ones to represent the feelings of the people within their own times. Do you get it? Like, they're there to reflect on what they see around them.
Yeah.
Because
media
poets are
reflects
very...
the culture that
Yeah, and that's poets.
It.
They're not doing fiction shit, time period stuff. It's
Yeah.
always typically about what's in the moment. And because America was such a young country, someone would need to show the people its growing virtues and vices. Walt Whitman, having forever abandoned fiction, set out to be that poet. Just a few years after his story Jack Angle was released with nothing to show for it, on May 15th, 1855, Walt Whitman would register the copyright to the title of his newest book. And just 1.5 months later, on July 4th, 1855, Whitman would release his poetry collection to the world, Leaves of Grass. And just as a sidebar, it's a very serene title that would, of course, invoke the naturistic writings of the poems within, but the title was actually a play on words, which Whitman found very clever. Leaves is another name for pages, and grass is what publishers called very minor work with no real value. So it was kind of a joke on himself. It's just pages of shit, is basically what he called it. So anyway, the poetry in Leaves of Grass... Huh? Does he kill himself? No, he's not one of those poets.
All right.
No, it's a fair question when you're a poet.
So far, it just sounds like life is disappointing him at every turn, despite him, picking up righteous causes.
Yeah. He's not going to have a lot to show. Well, no, he will.
Okay.
I'm not going to ruin it. You know what? Just don't worry.
Alert.
So anyway, the poetry in Leaves of Grass has no rhyme and has no cadence like you would find with poets of the day. To put it in perspective, most poets at this time were riffing off Percy Bysshe Shelley, who had a good flow and kept his stanzas to certain lines. Instead, Walt's poetry is completely freeform. As a matter of fact, Whitman said he based his loose structure on that of the King James Bible, which he read like poetry. Weird, I know. I see you giving me that look. Okay. And the focus of his work is not on philosophical thoughts and feelings like that of Shelley, but instead on the material world, on things you can feel and taste and see, which is really fucking funny because as we explained in our Shelley episodes, people at Shelley's time were sick of the transcendentalism or whatever the fuck it was called. People hated Shelley because he wasn't talking about material things.
And then after he was a piece of shit?
No, but once he died, people were like, I want to be like Shelley, and people stopped writing about material things. And then people were like, why are you writing about material things? Are you a fucking idiot? So to give you a sense of his style, here are the opening lines of Whitman's first poem in Leaves of Grass called Song of Myself. Quote, I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume. Did you fart? I'm going to start over.
I'm sorry.
I'm not cutting it out. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health begin, hoping to cease not till death. It's good.
It doesn't sound like a guy that wanted to give up on being a novelist after receiving his first bit of criticism.
Why? This sounds like something you would make fun of?
No, it just sounds like he's confident in self-assured, but I guess at that point he was like
no. To him, he was like
16.
He was like no, he's 37. Well, yeah, okay, but like, so he is like, he told himself that he was a shit novelist, but not a shit writer. So he just changed the format basically, and he was like, I'm now America's poet. That is what I am, and he was extremely fucking. He had that William McGonagall like confidence.
But he actually
had some know-how.
Yeah.
Now, as far as publishing the book went, Whitman pretty much did it himself. To cut costs, he didn't go with any named publishers, but instead 2 Scottish guys he knew named Andrew and James.
DIY.
He would just head over to their place during his lunch break till he had 800 copies to sell. Did all the typesetting himself. And because of this, Whitman didn't add the name of the publisher, which was himself, or even the name of the author. There was no table of contents in Leaves of Grass, no title to the poems. There was just an engraving Whitman had commissioned of himself that kind of looks like he's upset you opened the book. Like, he has his shirt unbuttoned a little bit, his hat is cocked, and he's looking at you sideways with a hand on his hip.
Is that actually him?
Yeah, that's his engraving.
Why does he look like Hans Gruber?
Fuck. But doesn't he look pissy? He's just kind of like,
guess you were dumb enough to buy my book.
He looks like, close it, goddammit. I was getting dressed. Like, I live here, asshole. Yeah. But that was it. 12 unnamed poems in 95 pages. Whitman said he wanted the book to be small enough that you could carry it around in your pocket. Quote,
pocket books.
Yeah. Quote, that would tend to induce people to take me along with them and read me in the open air. When it was released, because of not only the unconventional style of the poems, but of the printing layout itself, Leaves of Grass was basically marketed as a collectible oddity, and as such, no one read it.
Oh.
Now, when it was published, though, Walt Whitman set 1 copy aside and sent it to the 52-year-old Ralph Waldo Emerson, the guy who made the essay that inspired Walt Whitman to be a poet in the first place, to see if his call for a new American poet had been answered. What Whitman got back was a glowing response from Emerson. Quote, Dear Sir, I am not blind to the worth of the wonderful gift of Leaves of Grass. I find it the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom that America has yet contributed. I am very happy in reading it, as great power makes us happy. It meets the demand I am always making of what seemed the sterile and stingy nature, as if too much handiwork or too much lymph in the temperament were making our Western wits fat and mean.
Like too many people are trying to be Percy Bysshe, and it just...
Basically.
They oversaturated the market.
Yeah. And he's just like, finally.
Like pretentious D-bags.
Old poetry, yeah. The 5 pages of praise Whitman received from his hero convinced him to not only release a second edition, but to make even more poems for it too. Expanded the work from 95 pages to 384, which cannot be held in a pocket and taken with you like he said he wanted. Not only that, but just to show people that the book was even worth picking up, he decided to print excerpts from Emerson's letter in the newspaper to drum up interest.
Ooh, he's taking out marketing?
Yes. Even took a part of the letter which said, quote, I greet you at the beginning of a great career, and printed it in gold leaf on the spine of the second edition. Nice. Now, Emerson is a well-respected and very well-known writer, so these praises from him worked. Nice. And people immediately started buying up copies. However... Emerson thought the letter he sent to Whitman should have been kept personal, and he took great offense at it being printed for the world to see. In subsequent editions of Leaves of Grass, Emerson would be much more critical towards Whitman's work. And yet, Whitman would continue to refer to Ralph Waldo Emerson as his, quote, master. Which, by the way, you know how you pick up a book or a movie today, and one of the things they used to try and get you to buy it is like several different quotes from reviewers saying how great it is? Yeah. It's called a blurb.
Yeah.
Well, because Whitman quoted his personal letter from Emerson on the spine, people marked this as the first ever blurb used in marketing. Wow. Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah.
What a violation.
What an asshole. This fucking bitch.
At least ask, dude.
I mean, to be fair, Walt Whitman's book would have never seen
the
success
without that blurb.
Yeah, it would not have seen the success that it did without it. But it's like he has no idea that like back in the 2000s in direct-to-DVD movies were like quoting Jennifer Tremble on fucking MySpace.com in really small letters. Best movie I've seen this year.
It was a nice little poem excerpt that you shared. You just you said materialistic, and that just made me think of like actually materialistic things. That wasn't what I was expecting.
Oh, well, he's not talking about Louis Vuitton bags or anything, but what he is talking about is he's talking about nature, like things that you can actually see. Yeah. Most people at this time
enjoying the world around you.
Exactly. Which most people are like, why can't you be a fucking philosopher about it? Are you stupid?
Because there's too many of them. It's an oversaturated market.
It really is. So anyway, the second edition of Leaves of Grass comes out, and it's an immediate success thanks to Emerson's review. But that didn't mean
gold leaf.
Yeah, but that didn't mean it was liked. Now, like I said before, Whitman's poetry was different. It veered completely off of what was popular. I mean, Emerson told everyone that what we needed was someone willing to do something new, and everyone agreed with him. But when they got it, they decided they didn't actually really mean it.
Not like that.
Yeah. The people's biggest gripe, though, was that these poems were very sexually charged. More than you might think. One poem in particular that garnered a lot of attention was the very first poem of the book, Song of Myself, which goes on for 54 pages in my edition. It is a huge poem broken up into 52 sections. What some people think are meant to represent the weeks in a year. It actually has a lot of themes and motifs and is honestly seen as one of the greatest poems ever produced. But no one could see any of that while there were naked people being flaunted in front of their faces.
Okay, what? Because this is poetry. Did he include pictures, like nudie pictures?
Yeah, when he flipped the back, it's his naked ass and chaps. No. So here it is.
The beginnings of Tom of Finland?
I fucking wish. Quote, 28 young men bathe by the shore. 28 young men and also friendly. 28 years of womanly life and also lonesome. Caleb's not here. We get to use him.
That button's called fairy music.
She owns the fine house by the rise of the bank. She hides, handsome and richly dressed, aft the blinds of the window. Which of the young men does she like the best? All the homeliest of them is beautiful to her. Where are you off to, lady? For I see you. You splash in the water there, yet stay stock still in your room.
So wait.
What?
Who's naked?
The young men. She's basically...
They're just publicly naked, and she's just in her room also naked?
Yeah, she's watching them, and she's pretending
bathing
that she's
herself?
There. She's pretending, at least. So, you splash in the water there, yet stay stock still in your room. Dancing and laughing along the beach came the 29th bather. The rest did not see her, but she saw them and loved them. The beards of the young men glistened with wet. It ran from their long hair. Little streams passed all over their bodies. An unseen hand also passed over their bodies. It descended tremblingly from their temples and ribs. The young men float on their backs. Their white bellies bulge into the sun. They do not ask who seizes fast to them. They do not know who puffs and declines with pendant and bending arch. They do not think whom they souse with spray.
It summons images of Tina Belcher.
Fuck, man. Please don't make me think of Walt Whitman as the Tina Belcher of his time. But
no, he just writes Bob's Burgers fan fiction poetry.
Well, you're not completely off. And it wasn't just the common people that were upset by this book, though. It got extremely bad reviews from critics. The most scathing one, famously, was written by a lady from The New Yorker named Juliet H. Beach. But you see...
It's projection.
Her husband was a book reviewer, too. And what happened was that The New Yorker sent Juliet a copy of Leaves of Grass to review, and her husband, Calvin, was mad that she got asked to review it and not him. So while Juliet says that she actually thought the book was pretty damn good, Calvin forced her to let him write the review under her name as if she'd written it and send it in. So this
if
review...
you are a man, get your own fucking job.
Okay, she would have been fucking slapped for saying
Yeah,
that.
she would have.
Do not forget your place in this timeline, not here in this house.
Yeah, in that timeline.
In that timeline.
She would have been
fuck
slapped.
Up.
No.
Remember your place.
No! I don't know.
That button goes way too long. So anyway, so this review was all over the place with insults, partly at a book Calvin didn't like, and partly at the New Yorker itself for hiring his wife instead of him. Quote, Walt Whitman has done his work. He has done this, and the world has now no further need of him. It accepts the revolting lesson as it must, but it does not need the teacher longer. If Walt has left within him any charity, will he not now rid the taught and disgusted world of himself? Not by poison, or the rope, or pistol, or by any of the common modes of suicide, because some full man to whom life has become a grievous burden may at a later day be compelled to choose between death by the same means and a hateful life, and with the pride of noble manhood turn shuddering to live on, rather than admit so much of oneness as would be implied by going to death as did Walt Whitman. He's saying that Walt Whitman needs to find a way to kill himself that no one else uses so that he doesn't ruin that method like he ruined poetry.
You know, that guy, what really probably happened was, going off of this thing that realistically women did not have rights back then.
Back then? Sorry.
Yeah.
Continue.
The newspaper probably hired the wife because they didn't have to pay her as much.
That could be, but honestly, I do believe she was probably better. They were like, can
better,
you do this and
cheaper?
Not your shit?
Hell yeah, we're hiring her. Get fucked.
A moderate income.
Moderate income.
One reviewer called Whitman a pretentious ass. Another had such a bashing of Whitman's work that Walt actually had the review printed in the back of one of his later editions. Hell, when Leaves of Grass first came out, Walt surprised his family with the book, and his own brother George said he thought the poetry wasn't, quote, worth reading.
That is so wild, given that you've just told me that everybody was all about Percy Bysshe Shelley and being a philosopher with your poetry. Like, it's so pretentious writing about the normal fucking experience
about the
of
things,
just admiring a body.
Yeah, right?
And enjoying the sunshine.
But that was a big reason people hated it, was just how sexually charged it was. That was like, nobody would dare admit. Like, it's kind of like...
They were still being fucking weird about it, like Victorian England. Like,
yeah,
tablecloths going down to the floor because table legs are too sexually charged.
Yeah. No, man, I'm coming all over that table. Are you kidding me?
If I can't come on women, I'm coming on your furniture.
I mean, that's a real reason that they keep the table length long, so that they wouldn't see me spank it under the table at dinner.
Gross, don't.
But this whole thing, though, between his brother George and Walt saying that he didn't like his poetry or that it wasn't worth reading, I'm sure that was a pretty sad moment for Walt, because his dad, Walt Sr., had actually passed away just a few days after the book's release. So I feel like it would have been like a sentimental moment between the brothers, and then his brother just starts shitting on it. But one reviewer in particular saw early signs of Whitman's poetry perhaps leering towards his own sexuality, and was the first to call him out on it. He said that Walt Whitman was guilty of, quote, that horrible sin not to be mentioned among Christians.
Did you mention something about sodomizing?
Yes,
earlier?
exactly. That was a rumor that he got run out of Queens by a preacher who called him a sodomite. We don't know. Again, that rumor was not around.
Catholic preacher?
Well, I mean, it sounds like it was
that
more Quaker around.
Knows.
Yeah, right.
Priests, you know.
But so I feel like that rumor came out after he died, but I don't know for sure from when it stems. So
from when
either way,
it came.
We'll get back to Walt Whitman's sexuality a bit later on. But Leaves of Grass wasn't just hated by the people and the critics and his own family, but fellow poets too. Thomas Wentworth Higginson, the man who would go on to mentor Emily Dickinson in about 7 years' time, said, quote, it is no discredit to Walt Whitman that he wrote Leaves of Grass, only that he did not burn it afterwards. To a lot of people, if they weren't saying they were disgusted by Whitman's use of naked people in his poems, said they were mad that he was trying to return to what was called transcendentalist writing. Basically, it was a short-lived poetry movement that talked about the goodness of mankind and shit, and it died out like 15 years prior. But Ralph Waldo Emerson was a transcendentalist writer, and everyone liked him just fine. So some people were just pretending not to be sickened by
Ralph Waldo Emerson write about hard bodies?
That's the thing. People were pretending that they weren't sickened by Whitman's use of sexual subjects and just said that he wasn't up to snuff as a poet, which was wrong.
To it. That's why there are so many sold copies.
Yeah. Well, yes. And honestly, Walt was shocked at all the hate he got. He really thought he'd be immediately loved by the public for his poetry. And partly, he blamed his approach. Most people picked up the book with no regard for who wrote it and had only their own interpretations to work off of. And according to Walt, most of the interpretations he heard were flat out wrong.
Oh.
He felt the problem could have been avoided had he toured the country reading the poems to crowds. Quote, "If I had gone directly to the people, read my poems, faced the crowds, got into immediate touch with Tom, Dick, and Harry instead of waiting to be interpreted, I'd have had my audience at once." Which, motherfucker, you may have been lynched. Now, sometime after the second edition came out, Walt Whitman branched out from poetry to release a series of weird little self-help articles he would publish in the New York Atlas from September 12th, 1858 to December 26th of that year.
It's so random.
It's called Manly Health and Training, with offhand hints toward their conditions, under the name Mose Velsor. Now, we only know about this because after Whitman died, he left behind a shitload of papers scattered around that kind of feels like we're still sifting through to this day. The dude just lived in a fire hazard. It actually kind of reminds me of a less sad Henry Darger now that I think about it. But one of the things that was found in 2016 were his drafts of Manly Health. Anyway, while I didn't read it, Whitman apparently uses these articles as helpful tips and tricks to get healthy, like sunbathing nude, growing a beard, and exclusively eating meat. So if you wanted to know what Walt Whitman was like in his daily life, these articles can give you a pretty good clue.
So he had gout.
I think that he was one of those you need to bleach your butthole with the sun kind of guys. You know what I mean? I think he was probably one of those guys.
Big, hairy, tan Hans Gruber.
I mean, I will say this. The smells of New York in the 1800s probably covered up his own stench as well. So that's probably a good thing. Like, you can smell a taint from a mile away, but not him. Not in that day.
Jesus.
Anyway, while Leaves of Grass had found a much wider audience to hate it in its second printing, it meant more copies sold, which meant that Walt Whitman was now looking at a third edition of his work. So for this edition, Whitman would turn...
Hate reading.
Yeah, exactly. It's the whole reason Velma's getting a second season on HBO.
Jesus Christ, that's right, I forgot.
So for this edition, Whitman would turn to publishing house Thayer and Eldridge, run by two guys named William Thayer and Charles Eldridge. Whitman figured with a bigger publisher, it meant they could publish the book in greater numbers, which would lead to greater success. But unfortunately, soon after the third edition was released in 1860, Thayer and Eldridge went bankrupt. Had nothing to do with Walt. They were just bad businessmen. So Whitman asks for his royalties, and they tell him, quote, "In regards to money matters, we are very short ourselves, and it is quite impossible to send the sum." Instead, they gave him $250 in the best of luck.
Oh.
Which is...
Oh, how much is that in today's money?
That's actually a little over $9,000 today.
Oh.
It's not bad, but honestly, probably wouldn't even cover rent for a full year back then.
It's still New York.
Yeah, exactly. Now, in 1861, the American Civil War starts. And luckily, Walt is not the only Whitman that felt so passionately about emancipation. His brother, George Washington Whitman, the one who called his work not worth reading, joins the 51st New York Infantry Regiment and goes to the front lines. Goes to the front lines to kill himself some Southies. And of course, Walt's all for it. Of course, never enlisting himself.
That was a very surprising sentence. To kill himself some Southies. Oh, okay.
Hey, that's why a lot of people join the military. Why you want to go? I just don't want to kill myself, but put myself in a very dangerous situation. All right, man, I hope you do better. And of course, Walt's all for this. Of course, never listing himself. But in December of 1862, the New York Tribune runs a list of wounded and fallen soldiers, among which is the name G.W. Whitmore. Now, of course, that's not George's last name, but Walt worked in the newspaper biz. He knew how little people cared to get shit right. So on a hunch that they were talking about his brother, Walt Whitman makes the trek all the way from New York City down into the active war zones of the South and just starts asking around for his brother. To top off this horrible experience, his fucking wallet got stolen somewhere along the way. But he also made time to take a huge detour in Washington, D.C., just so that he could get a look at Lincoln. But anyway, Walt found his brother. He was fine. When he found him, he was like, I'm sure Walt was like, I was so worried you were dead. And George, like, what was the name that was reported? G.W. Whitmore. Well, that's not my fucking name, is it, dipshit? Yeah.
Yeah, he sounds like that kind of brother.
Yeah. Your book still fucking sucks, by the way. But during Walt's trip to find his brother, he got to see the battlefields firsthand. He saw piles of amputated limbs just lying around, tons of dead bodies in the roads, and he realizes, holy shit, this is actually fucking happening. Because you got to remember, the first time people that weren't in the army got to experience what was happening in war was fucking Vietnam. For Americans, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're 100 years before that. Most people didn't understand that when you got shot, you didn't just go, and then fall on the floor like you're on stage. You have a good chance of surviving being shot, and then they dig around in your fucking guts for the shrapnel, and then you die in pain from lead poisoning years later. So Walt says to himself that he's done with New York. His purpose is now to help the Union Army. Not by joining it, God no, but by moving to Washington, D.C. to become a volunteer at the Veterans Hospital.
Oh.
Now, he just kind of showed up, and no one knew who he was, but he seemed willing to do whatever he could to help, so they called him a volunteer missionary. But during this time, he ended up consoling the dying, writing letters to the families of soldiers that couldn't do it themselves, and helped run supplies. Like, he was actually...
He's just an all-around gopher.
Yeah, just like he was as a printer's devil, and even before that. Yeah, that's all that he was good at.
It all comes back in the end.
Yeah, but he was actually helpful.
Yeah.
So instead of volunteer missionary, they started calling him a volunteer nurse. But for all the good he was doing, it wasn't good enough for Walt, who wanted a more official-sounding position. So he wrote a letter to Ralph Waldo Emerson saying,
oh boy,
look, I know you love my book, so it would be great if you could use some of your fame to get me a higher position and power, you understand?
Oh no.
And to his credit, though, Emerson kind of said fuck it and actually tried. He got a letter of recommendation all the way up to the Secretary of the Treasury, a man named Salmon Portland Chase.
But, like, what would he even fucking do? I'm sorry, no disrespect to writers, but in this situation where you're helping at a hospital with wounded soldiers, what are you going to do besides help write letters to people who can't write because they got their arms blown off or whatever the fuck, or can't see because they got their eyes blown off or whatever the fuck? That is
a great point, but I feel that you're missing the real point here.
Is it propaganda? Is he gonna become part of the No Spin Zone network?
No.
Oh boy.
No, but I feel like you're really missing the point here.
Don't tell me it's head surgeon.
No. Again, you're missing the point. None of that matters. The Secretary of the Treasury was named Salmon Portland Chase. That is the point I'm trying to make here.
Okay, so he
my strong swimmer of a son,
the
Salmon.
Fish Man.
Yeah. Fucking Shadow over
Maine?
Innsmouth is real. Yeah, right? But when Salmon looked up who the fuck Walt Whitman was, he gave a quick flip through his book, and he went, I am not about to hire the guy who wrote fucking Leaves of Grass. Are you fucking kidding me? In later years, when Salmon would run for president, Whitman would remark that he was, quote, the meanest and biggest kind of shyster. Well, you really pulled one over on me by not doing anything when I asked. Like, what the fuck?
I wanted a better position at the hospital, and all I knew how to do was print stuff and be a writer. Like, he was actually helping.
doing what he was needed to do. Yeah.
What did he want to do? He wanted to help by doing administrative
right.
duties.
I don't know. Like, that's the problem with this guy. He's like, no, I am self-important. It's like, yes, self-important, but you don't actually have a real
skills,
trade.
But like, they're very specific skills that do not apply at all to the hospital setting unless it is in.
They're basically like just to writing.
An office worker.
Exactly, office work. That's all that. I mean,
Yeah.
But we'll get there.
Like all of us do. All of us creatives end up as,
Yeah.
Not related.
You want to dig that? Go down that road?
No.
All right, so now when Whitman got to D.C. without any kind of real plan, he ended up staying with a friend and fellow poet named William Douglas O'Connor. Now, this guy was a poet in his own right, actually influenced by a little book that had come out 7 years earlier called Leaves of Grass. And O'Connor seems to have run into Whitman a couple years before his move to D.C., and they kept up a correspondence. Well, now that Whitman was in O'Connor's neck of the woods...
Staying with one of his fans.
Yeah.
If that fan was a woman, he would be so canceled.
All right, Neil Gaiman. But so now that he was in D.C., Whitman asked him to help him find a job. And O'Connor actually worked for the Treasury Department at this time, which, through his connections, was able to get Walt a job at the Department of the Interior. Now, the Department of the Interior, because I, like many other Americans, have heard of it at least once before on probably TV, and I have no fucking idea what it is. Would you like to... Yes, I was like, would you like to explain it? Good job, you did it. It's all about rugs. No.
Dude, that was a joke.
No, it is still a joke,
okay.
Don't worry.
Okay, cool. Like...
The Department of the Interior actually oversees the preservation of our nation's federal land. At this point, it was newly formed in 1849, so when Whitman started working there, he had all the room he needed to move around in professionally. Granted, he was a low-income clerk, but he had a cushy government job. Specifically, he worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which oversees tribal lands explicitly. But here's the thing. Walt Whitman, though having meager success through the 3 different editions of his book so far, was still working on expanding and perfecting Leaves of Grass. This meant that he kept his manuscripts...
So he was doing the Taylor Swift before she was Taylor Swift.
Yes, exactly.
It's Leaves of Grass, but different because I added 2 more poems.
Yeah, but this meant that he kept his manuscripts at his desk. Well, one day, his boss, James Harlan, finds a random book on Whitman's desk, and he decides to flip through it.
Oh, no.
On June 30th, 1865, Harlan had his secretary deliver to Walt Whitman his letter of dismissal. Harlan defended his choice by saying, quote, "I will not have the author of that book in this department. If the President of the United States should order his reinstatement, I would resign sooner than I would have put him back." Now, when people were mad, dude.
Hell yeah.
People hated this fucking book.
You gotta respect haters.
Yeah.
The dedication
just
to holding that grudge.
Yeah, just dunking down a glass of haterade.
Yeah.
Now, when Whitman's buddy, William Douglas O'Connor, the guy that he was staying with for a time, found out that he'd lost his job over Leaves of Grass, he was fucking furious.
Don't tell me homie quit.
No, he wrote this long-winded essay, finishing it just a couple months after Walt got fired and publishing it the next year, called The Good Gray Poet, where he just bitches out James Harlan for several pages.
And James Harlan is just this office boss.
Yeah, he's the guy who basically looked at it and was like, so this dude brought in very explicit material into work, like for the time. It was basically akin to being like, hey, so you just left your script for fucking smut? Like, could you, look, I understand that you're working on chapter 5 of Cum Guzzlers, but like, could you please maybe leave it at home?
Leave that at home.
Granted, he didn't give him a chance, though. He just immediately fired him, but still, you know. But here's the thing. I looked for anything that was a remotely good insult within The Good Gray Poet, but there wasn't one. Like, the best I found was William Douglas O'Connor saying, quote, "Mr. Harlan takes up the Iliad and the Odyssey, the loves of Jupiter and Juno, the dalliance of Achilles and Patroclus with their women, the perfectly frank, Undraped reality of Greek life and manners naively shown without regard to the feelings of Christian civilities. Horrible. Out with Homer.
Question.
Yeah.
You've read those, or at least one of those.
Yeah.
Do they explicitly describe sexual desire?
So here's the thing. I also...
Because that would kind of make a difference.
They kind
between bringing in Leaves of Grass and the Iliad.
Well, here's the thing that I also was just kind of like looking over was like the dalliance of Achilles and Patroclus with their women. I don't think they had women, homie. Like I was
like,
but no, they're not explicit by any means.
Yeah, I think that's the difference.
Yeah. But, you know, to most people who have heard the tales but never bothered to read it, like the first time I quote unquote read the Odyssey was in a textbook, and it was not like I don't even think that there were snippets of it in there. Like they were literally just we were going through.
You had the wishbone version.
We really did, you know. But like what O'Connor is saying is that James Harlan is such a dipshit, he can't see a masterpiece when it's in front of him. So he would just as soon fire Homer as he would Walt Whitman.
Okay.
That's what he's saying there. But getting fired...
He could have said it more elegantly. I don't know.
I know. Well, he had 5 pages of bitching, and I read through, I scanned most of it, and I was like, all right, where's a good insult in here? There isn't one, huh?
It was not his Not Like Us.
Yeah, no. This was closer to Drake's Heart Part 5. It was it did not hit the mark. But getting fired... It sucked for Whitman because things were just starting to look up for him. He had gotten a promotion like 5 months prior that gave him $100 a month. His brother George had been released after getting captured by the Confederates.
Nice.
And he had taken his brother's experiences in the war and the things he saw on the battlefield and turned them into a poetry collection called Drum Taps, which he did also draw quite a bit of inspiration from Herman Melville's own collection of Civil War poetry called Battle Pieces and Aspects of the War. But what's funny is that no one besides those who'd read Leaves of Grass in New York even knew who Walt Whitman was.
Oh.
But when O'Connor comes out with this long bitch session called The Good Gray Poet, it got a whole new set of eyes on his work. And these...
More hate readers?
Well, these weren't people who were learning about his poetry from reviewers who were actively calling for Whitman's death. They were hearing from William O'Connor that he was like the best thing ever.
Since sliced bread.
So, which didn't exist yet.
And the Beatles.
Which may have existed at that point. It's hard to say. So people started looking at the book with a better mindset. And alongside The Good Gray Poet was a new poem Whitman had released that some regard as his greatest ever, called O Captain, My Captain. Quote, sounds like you're ready to say it with me. Come on.
No, I just know it. I hate it. I just know it from Dead Poet Society.
Yes, I also hated that movie.
Oh, no, I love it. I hate myself for loving it.
As you should. I'm sorry, there's just not very good...
They're just handsome young men, okay?
I know, Robin Williams movies just aren't very good. I'm sorry. Like, I know that he was part of our childhood, but the guy just...
I'm just Tina Belcher, okay?
All right, I get it.
All right.
I get it. Quote, O Captain, my captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every wrack. The prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh heart, 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 oh the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. O captain, my captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills, for you bouquets and ribbed wreaths, for you the shores crowding, for you they call, the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Here, captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head, it is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer, his lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm, he has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip, the victor ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I, with mournful tread, walk the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. During his lifetime, this would be Walt Whitman's most famous poem. Probably because it was actually
the Dead Poets Society.
It was because of a fucking Robin Williams movie. Yeah. No, probably because it was actually somewhat normal.
Yeah.
As time went on and compilations were being made from the works of great American poets, "Oh Captain, My Captain" was the poem that showed up in fucking all of them. Now, like I'd mentioned before, Walt's brother George had been released by the Confederates from Libby Prison in February on 1865. When I looked it up, this was a bad fucking place to be.
Oops.
And about a month and a half after he was fired from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Walt made his way to his mom's place in New York to see his brother. It was April 15th, 1865, as they all sat down for breakfast when they heard the news. Lincoln had been killed.
Aww.
We all remember where we were that day, Nicole.
I was admiring some naked bathers from the window of my home, also pretending to bathe with them.
You're going to get us canceled. The entire family was in shock, Walt especially. Not sure what to do, he walked outside and just kind of sat at the stoop of his mom's place and looked at the flowers. Quote, "I remember where I was stopping at the time, the season being advanced. There were many lilacs in full bloom. By one of those caprices that enter and give tinge to events without being at all a part of them, I find myself always reminded of great tragedy of that day by the sight and odor of these blossoms. It never fails." Altogether, Walt would write 4 poems about the Lincoln assassination. Arguably his greatest one, in remembrance of the flowers that he sat and stared at that morning, was a poem called "When Lilacs in the Dooryard Bloomed." God damn, dude. I can't put in every fart. You're just fucking gassy, dude.
I'm sorry.
Quote, "Coffin that passes through lanes and streets, through day and night with the great cloud darkening the land, with the pomp of the enlooped flags, with the cities draped in black, with the show of the states themselves as of crape-veiled women standing, with processions long and winding in the flambeaux of the night, with the countless torches lit, with the silent sea of faces and the unbared heads, with the waiting depot, the arriving coffin, and the somber faces, with dirges through the night, with the 1,000 voices rising strong and solemn, with all the mournful voices of the dirges poured around the coffin, the dim-lit churches and the shuddering organs, where amid these you journey, with the tolling bells' perpetual clang. Hear that coffin that slowly passes. I give you my sprig of lilac." That's just a small snippet of a much longer poem, but the entire thing is very fucking good. Unfortunately, it was written like 6 months later. Instead, while Whitman's book of poetry about the Civil War, Drum Taps, was being printed in town, he felt it was super important to run over and have them add a hastily written poem in the back called "Hushed Be the Camps Today." It's not good. In 1867, Walt Whitman began advertising that the next edition of Leaves of Grass would be its last, for what he started to call his, quote, "unkillable work." This edition would include Drum Taps, as well as sequel to Drum Taps, and even, of course, some new unreleased material as well. Around this same time, his friend William Douglas O'Connor releases a story about Walt Whitman called "The Carpenter," which likens him to Jesus Christ. Now, as fanboyish as O'Connor was, he and Whitman would actually break off their friendship in 1872, just 4 years after this was published. You see, O'Connor was all about the 15th Amendment. It seemed like the natural progression after abolishing slavery. But Walt Whitman wasn't that into it.
Uh-oh.
And in case you're wondering, the amendment is, quote, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude."
He almost stuck the landing.
Can you guess which part of that Walt wasn't okay with?
The brown people, the not white men part.
I mean, that wasn't written in there, but yes. He was against slavery, sure, and I will defend my point on this. Throughout history, most people were not okay with slavery. They were willing to fight several wars about it. But giving black people the right to vote? Yeah. Whitman regarded freed slaves making it to possible positions of power within the government as, quote, blacks with about as much intellect and caliber in the mass as so many baboons.
Now, fuck this guy. Fuck this guy. Fuck his Taylor Swift style of publishing. It's Leaves of Grass, except not, because I've added Drum Taps to it and the sequel to Drum Taps. The direct-to-DVD sequel to Drum Taps.
Still,
That's...
I know. It's a little bit disappointing.
I mean, but it is not surprising for that time period.
No.
A lot of people were
and
like...
that's what a lot of people
wow,
like
isn't
to
that
say.
Nice? Oregon won't allow slaves. It's because they don't... the people living in Oregon at the time, the whiteys living in Oregon at the time,
they didn't allow black people at all.
People of
color. They were like, well, of course there's no slaves because they don't exist here. They're all over there where they belong. Like, Oregon has a terrible history. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's the thing that a lot of people say is like, oh, well, people were okay with slavery. No, they weren't. A lot of people, most people were not okay with slavery. They thought it was fucked up because specifically it could affect them too. Like, that's the thing. As you'll hear every like slavery apologist say, well, that there were Irish people that were also slaves. Yes, and it was also
and that's why people were against it, because it could happen to them.
Yes, if you were actually like
stop apologizing for slavery.
Yeah,
it's
if you were too in debt,
or
like if you were in prison for a certain term or something, you were eligible to become a slave too. As a white guy, it happened, but that's why, as you say, people were against slavery. Giving anybody beyond white people, or even certain like other white people, like Irish people, the right to vote? Absolutely not. No. Still, when William Douglas O'Connor died in 1889 at the age of 57, and his works were published posthumously, Walt Whitman would write the preface to his book. And when I read through it, I actually got the sense that Whitman felt it was his own fault for their friendship ending, and that he'd since then become a believer in the 15th Amendment. That was from what I got it anyway. Well, and I don't know for sure, but that's what it kind of sounded like. Like, he says he thought the 15th Amendment guys were radical extremists, and him saying it in the past tense kind of seems like maybe he changed his mind, but again, I don't know for sure. But anyway.
It's just rumors that he fucking learned his fucking lesson.
It's a hope. But anyway, back in 1867, when Whitman is 48 years old, he's looking to make a final addition to Leaves of Grass, right? Mm-hmm. Well, he found out that Thayer and Eldridge, the guys who went bankrupt and only gave him like $250, had actually sold the printing plates for Leaves of Grass to another publisher. So after all this time, 7 years later, Whitman follows the trail to Boston, where he meets publisher Horace Wentworth. Now, Wentworth seemed to understand the value of Whitman's work, and he convinces Walt that what he has isn't enough. Together, they would expand the book even further to 456 pages. But through Wentworth's marketing...
So much for making that...
a pocketable book.
Pocketable book.
Carry it with me in your fucking saddlebag.
Make them new books.
You know what?
Instead of just
Good
adding
fucking question.
on.
I don't know. But through Wentworth's marketing, this edition is a huge fucking success. So much so that for perhaps the first time ever, Walt Whitman isn't considered poor. He's actually making a return. By the next year, in 1868, an English critic by the name of William Michael Rossetti convinces Whitman to let him publish his poems in Europe, but not without making several changes, including the title. Leaves of Grass would sound too much like a novel, but Poems of Walt Whitman? Classy. Now, Walt actually didn't want to make any changes at all, but in the end, Rossetti was like, look, the only way you will ever be published in Europe is if you change some shit. In particular, the homosexuality. So extremely reluctantly, Walt Whitman agrees to make changes. And just like how Emerson's praise of the book was a catalyst for Whitman's fame, or infamy, in America, Whitman's popularity sprung throughout England thanks to the words of a critic named Anne Gilchrist. She had married an art critic named Alexander Gilchrist years ago, and through him was able to become a respected critic herself. Yet even after Alexander's death, her name was still highly regarded. In 1869, when Poems of Walt Whitman finally released, she wrote a huge essay called A Woman's Estimate of Walt Whitman. that skyrocketed sales due to her praise of the book. So much so that just 10 years later in 1879, a guy named Richard Worthington was able to purchase original printing plates for Leaves of Grass and start selling bootleg copies.
Nice.
Yeah. That's how you know you've really made it.
You should do an episode
by
on
not making
the history of the
bootleg. You know what? I fucking might. That's a pretty good idea.
It's pretty neat.
That sounds like a boring book that you would buy that I'd actually be like, you know what? I
fucking love to read that book. Yeah. Someone out there, please read it. Or not read it, write it. Or suggest it to your friends.
Or you could send it in to calebcan'tread@gmail.com so we could just order it over Amazon. But that was kind of like
such a book
exists. When we were in the rare book room in Powell's, there was like a book that was a bunch of biographies of popular scribes from back in the day, like people who would make illuminated manuscripts. Ooh. I know, and I was like, oh, dope. And the book didn't look that old, but it was like a lot. It was a lot of money. I was like, motherfucker.
Book elitists,
I would read that. I know. It's like, let
Give
me buy
the knowledge to the people. Scan it. Put it online.
Yes.
Let's pirate books. Bootleg books. Bootleg books.
There's some really indie authors right now listening to this and just being like, man, fuck these guys.
Yeah.
This is how I make my money, and you guys are just shitting on it.
Yeah. Well, if it's fucking expensive, then...
No, I agree.
I don't know. Are we going to find that in the library? We should check the library.
The library isn't going to have this.
God damn it.
I know. So Whitman's international fame had finally come, but he was still working government jobs to get by. He'd actually been given a position at the Attorney General's office.
I work a government job. I get a pension and a 401k, whatever the fucking benefits.
Yeah, poor him. He'd actually been given a position at the Attorney General's office where he got to hear cases from Confederate soldiers regarding whether or not they should be pardoned. Like, he got to decide whether or not they got set free. So, yeah, as you can imagine, he was very good at his job.
Yeah.
That sounds like a kick-ass job.
You a racist, get fucked.
Yeah. In the early part of 1873, when Walt was about 52 years old, he suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. His brother George was living in Camden, New Jersey at the time, and was already taking care of their old mother. So he figured, why not both, and had Walt move in too.
That's a lot nicer than I expected of George, who was just like, let me shit on your fucking career.
Yeah, it's fair, actually. Yeah, you made a bad book, so I hope you die in
your
a hospital.
Your book is not to my liking.
I don't know, I guess.
Quit it. Get a new job.
Their mother, Louisa Whitman, would pass not long after. Her death left Walt extremely depressed. With just his brother and his family left, Walt opted to stay with George for the next 11 years. Not entirely sure if he actually asked beforehand. But Walt treated this home like his own, and as such, had a number of guests, some of which were well-known names. Thomas Eakins was a master of realist paintings from the Philly area, and was famous for his portraits, both paintings and photographs, of nude subjects. Some women, sure, but his paintings, such as Wrestlers and The Swimmin' Hole,
Tom of Finland,
show great technique in the muscle structure of young men, especially. Now,
how old were these young men?
I don't know. I looked at the pictures and felt uncomfortable.
No. Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! Oh no!
Now, it's been argued by scholars for decades as to whether or not Thomas Eakins was gay. I mean, he was married to a woman after all, but he did later live with a sculptor.
Called beards.
I know, he did later live with a sculptor named Samuel Murray as well. He could also just be bi. That's a thing that just people had not heard of back then. True. Regardless, he painted a portrait of Walt Whitman that remained the poet's favorite throughout his entire life. No, he wasn't. Boo. I know, I was also a little bit disappointed.
Boo.
Now, I can't speak for whether or not Thomas Eakins was gay, but I can tell you who was. Oscar Wilde. Good job. Remember when I said we'd talk about Walt Whitman's sexuality? This is that part. Perfect. Yep. We're going to use all of these buttons. That's the wrong time. That's perfect timing.
Oh
so Whitman would later write a friend, quote, "He is a fine, large, handsome youngster. he had the good sense to take a great fancy to me. Walt was 62 at this point, and Oscar was 27.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's a... He is more than half his fucking age, dude.
Ew.
And that wasn't really their only difference. Oscar Wilde had many years of schooling under his belt. Whitman left school when he was 11. Wilde was hailed as a poet of old-school decadence. Whitman was detested mountain man with free-form thought. But while Oscar Wilde was on tour in America, an interviewer asked him, quote, "What poet do you most admire in America?" And Oscar told him, quote, "I think Walt Whitman and Emerson have given the world more than anyone else." Well, his agent heard this and decided to seek Whitman out. The next day, Wilde received a note at his hotel which read, "Walt Whitman will be in from 2 till 3:30 this afternoon and will be most happy to see Mr. Wilde." When Whitman answered the door, he saw the boyish Oscar Wilde standing before him, where he famously said, quote, "I come as a poet to call upon a poet." Now, what we know for certain, and what was written about later by Wilde, was that Whitman offered him a drink of his homemade wine, and they ended up chatting enough that they killed the whole bottle. Yeah, I see you waiting. After that, they went up to Walt's room and chatted. In Walt's version of events, Oscar was actually really happy to hear someone call him by his first name and not just Mr. Wilde. And Walt gave him a photograph of himself before he left. Did they fuck? Looking at the complete difference between this twink and the bear, yeah, I think they did. Do you have something to say? You look like you're holding back. Go ahead. Show me all of your
scandalous.
Show me all of your knowledge that you've learned from AO3.com.
No, it just gives me. It gives me like
pause. Quite literally,
because it's like, here's the young up and coming starlet of the poetry world, a young 20-something. Meeting the old battle-hardened critic, meeting
the fuck-crusted space marine
poet.
Yeah.
Oh, Captain, my Captain. Raise the flag.
Your whole lies gaped and soaked.
It just, I don't know. Because now we live in a time where we are able to call out that kind of power dynamic for what it is. And so now just everything is like, did they really get along, or was he just
here's
kind of
thing.
Abusing this young fan's
I know, and
admiration,
here's the thing.
And wine.
I, of course, have to say with my eyes rolling, we'll never know for sure. But still, someone joked with Oscar Wilde afterwards that it must have been tough to drink that homemade wine, and Oscar said, quote, "If it had been vinegar, I should have drunk it all the same. I have an admiration for that man which I can hardly express." Now that is all that Oscar himself would say. But apparently, according to a friend of his, when Oscar returned to England, he told him, quote, "I have the kiss of Walt Whitman still on my lips." Which sounds kind of nice, but knowing how fucking stinky Whitman probably was, maybe
also,
he didn't say it like it was a good thing.
Back then, people... He definitely looked like an old man.
I bet he gave his lips rug burn. Yeah, he looked like an old man.
Showering was like a special occasion or something.
Well, we have his fucking manly tips and health training regimen or whatever, where he's fucking sunbathing nude and fucking just eating nothing but raw meat.
I don't know. I don't know.
I know, yeah.
All I'm picturing now is just this young hotsy-totsy Oscar Wilde kissing a leather bag.
You've seen pictures of Oscar Wilde, what he looked like, right?
No.
Okay, well, here, let me show you.
Show me a picture of the hotsy-totsy.
So I will show you a picture of both of these men. So here's Oscar Wilde, and I think that this is going to be fairly... accurate to what they looked like at the time.
Not like that
because
one picture
pictures
Jane
were
Austen.
Yeah. So there's Oscar Wilde, kind of looking like my cousin Kyle.
Fabulous.
Yeah, and then
Is
here's
Kyle that fabulous though?
And then here's Walt Whitman. because back in the day, they still had, like, you know, they were just getting photographs going when he was about this old.
Homie, that is like some...
Look, I'm not going to lie, though. If I saw Walt Whitman in a bar...
Please, Headmaster Whitman, don't expel me from the Young Boys Academy.
I know.
I will be a very good student.
And I get that.
I will bend over for the paddling if that is what it will take.
I'm sorry, you're going into role play here. You're saying that they role played the hell out of this, right?
It's my Young Boy Academy. Young Boy Writers
Young Boy
Academy
is the name of your fucking book, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's my friend fiction, my poet fan fiction. AU.
I'm not gonna lie though. I think that, like, here's the thing. Look, if I in the suit and everything, if I saw this dude at the bar, I would be like, you know what, kind of handsome. Not gonna lie, kind of handsome. Maybe not in that exact photograph,
but would you let him?
This one? Would I let him fuck? No. No,
exactly.
Dude. The way that I know that Walt Whitman actually dressed, I'd be like, no, this bum needs to go. Crawl back to your tent under the Ross Island Bridge, sir.
God.
I'm trying to eat in front of you. So it's been debated for over 100 years now whether or not Walt Whitman was straight or gay or even bisexual. But those that say...
Why do people need to know?
Well, I know. Because
I mean,
still have...
it's important, I suppose. It's important for, like, representation. Representation does matter.
But here's the thing. We still have extremely homophobic...
Years, yeah.
We still have extremely homophobic literary critics still alive today. They're old as fuck and they're dying. But they're still the ones propelling this argument because they have the 60-plus years of literary experience as a career.
Denial.
Yes. So these are the same people that bitch about Emily Dickinson and Willa Cather. They all do this.
It makes me think of, like, all the guys that came back from World War II shitting on Japanese whiskey just because of their racism.
Yeah. And then it turns out Japanese whiskey is fucking great. Now it's having a huge explosion in resurgence. And
it's expensive.
And now it's expensive as fuck and I can't find any. But here's the thing. Those that say Walt Whitman was straight are just straight up sticking their fingers in their ears and pretending he is at this point.
Sticking their fingers up their bums.
They wish. That's what it's projection. Because we have numerous letters and journal entries and shit.
Are they spicy?
Published work by Walt Whitman himself.
Yeah. It's not just that young girl admiring those nude bodies.
Yeah, no. We have plenty of proof to show that he was queer in one manner or another at, some point.
If nothing else, he was not 100% straight.
No. So really the question has come down whether whether he was gay or bisexual. And granted, honestly, I don't think this is any of our fucking business, but this has honestly been the biggest debate among scholars regarding Walt Whitman to this day. Whether he... Shit. Fuck you. Stop it. But yeah, no, to this day, everyone is saying, is he gay or bisexual? And that's the biggest thing that people still don't seem to know. Now, the 1860 edition of Leaves of Grass was the introduction to 57 poems that Whitman put under a section called calamus, which, if you're curious, is a plant that kind of looks like a dick. Now, these poems alone, if in different sections of the book, would almost mean nothing. But when you read them side by side under, the penis section, it sounds kind of gay. Quote, "Whoever you are holding me now in hand, without one thing all will be useless. I give you fair warning before you attempt me further. I am not what you supposed, but far different. Who is he that would become my follower? Who would sign himself a candidate for my affections?"
Ooh, ooh.
Yeah, right? Now, these poems, though, in Calamus, they aren't pornographic by any means, but they do seem geared toward an affection for men.
Yeah.
Speaking of the 1860 edition, by the way, as evidence for a possible bisexual side to Whitman, he also added a poem I think you'll like called "To a Common Prostitute." Quote, maybe... That goes on way longer than it needs to.
All right, give me the prostitute poem.
And I'm going to change my voice for how I think he probably wrote this. Quote, "Be composed. Be at ease with me. I am Walt Whitman, liberal and lusty as nature. Not till the sun excludes you do I exclude you. Not till the waters refuse to glisten for you and the leaves to rustle for you do my words refuse to glisten and rustle for you. My girl, I appoint with you an appointment, and I charge you that you make preparation to be worthy to meet me. And I charge you that you be patient and perfect till I come. Till then, I salute you with a significant look that you do not forget me.
It really sounds like, hey, I'm not weird. Just let me give you money and let me fuck. I promise I won't do anything weird. You're safe. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
He's the dude who's trying really hard to get into the champagne room at a strip club, and they're like
no, it's fine. I respect women.
I don't have the availability, sir. No, sorry, it's okay. I actually can't. No, sir, I'm sorry. I actually get off around now. I can't do it. Sorry.
What if I give you money?
But I'm actually no, it's okay.
It's okay. I'm a nice guy.
I know.
I have references,
and I would, but I gotta go. Let me give you my Snapchat. Let me give you my Snapchat.
I've got a President Lincoln that will
$5
convince you. Hey, for back then it was a lot.
Or a penny. Now, when the Calamus poems came out, they caught the attention of a guy named John Addington Symonds. Symonds was a pioneer in same-sex studies. I mean, he was a foundation in admitting that artists of the past, like Michelangelo and Da Vinci, were fucking gay as shit. Unfortunately, he also thought pedophilia was okay, so he's not someone to be celebrated.
Yeah, don't
Yeah.
Maybe hesitate using him as a source.
Wanted to go ahead and throw that out there. Still, he knew
gross.
Walt Whitman was something, and he badgered him for 20 fucking years until one day.
So he's a contemporary.
Until one day Whitman told Symonds, "I'm not gay. I fathered 6 illegitimate children. 2 are dead. I'm more than straight. I'm mega straight." The Calamus section of the book has 0...
He had to work so hard to convince that prostitute.
0 sexual undertones. You're just reading it wrong. And that is all paraphrasing, but those are all points that he made. He said that he had 6 illegitimate kids. 2 of them were dead. The Calamus section was just being read wrong, and don't worry about it.
He needed to test himself to see.
But
Am I really, though?
I think he's full of shit. I really do not think he ever fathered any children whatsoever. I mean, it just felt very...
poo babies.
That was stupid.
I know. I'm sorry.
No, he just... it was just... Nicole, shut the fuck up. Stop explaining anal sex to me, please. But yeah, it wasn't hard to figure out even back then, and there were rumors. For years after Whitman's death, there would be people in the gay scene who were like, yeah, I totally fucked Walt Whitman. I heard people did the same thing.
That poem on the 5th edition of Leaves of Grass,
that was totally me. Yeah. I don't know if you knew that. No, people did the same shit about Andy Warhol after he was assassinated. People were just like
on that prostitute poem. But
yeah, but that was actually he didn't say
originally.
He didn't say my girl. He said my Carl, but it However,
that bitch owes me royalties.
In regards to people who actually fucked Walt Whitman, I would be remiss not to mention a man by the name of Peter George Doyle. Now, Peter Doyle was born sometime in June of 1843 in Limerick, Ireland. He made his way to the American East Coast when he was about 10, and by the time the Civil War came around, he was 17, and he signed up for the Confederate Army. I know, that was probably a weird thing to discuss in bed. After the war, he worked as a streetcar conductor in Washington, D.C., and was even witness to Lincoln's assassination at Ford's Theater. In 1865, when Pete was 21, he had only one passenger on his streetcar one night, who turned out to be none other than the 43-year-old Walt Whitman. They got to talking.
Ew.
Look, I thought this was kind of sweet until you brought that up, but yeah, no. They got to talking, and as Doyle would later say to biographer Richard Maurice Buck, quote, "We were familiar at once. I put my hand on his knee. We understood. He did not get out at the end of the trip. In fact, he went all the way back with me."
All the way?
God damn it, Nicole. Soon they had a written correspondence. Whitman wrote about Peter Doyle frequently, calling him 16.4 in his diary as a sort of code, but which is very easily decipherable.
Like his score out of 10, 10 being the greatest.
Boy, out of 10, you are a 16.4. The way you give it a little flick at the end. Jesus damn, boy. No, P is the 16th letter in the alphabet, and D is 4th. PD, Peter Doyle. Get it? Anyway, Walt seemed to be infatuated with Peter Doyle, and while Doyle seemed to reciprocate his feelings, man, Walt's old. And when he suffered his stroke in 1873, that was kind of it for them. After that, it was Walt living with his brother in Camden, where he'd stretch his wings to people like Thomas Eakins and Oscar Wilde. Now, it's been 10 years since Walt last published Leaves of Grass, and while he hasn't worked on expanding it, the book is still selling out. So his publishers set up a photo shoot in the spring of 1877 for the 57-year-old Whitman. They wanted to invoke this sense of connection with nature that Whitman seemed to have, and coincidentally, a butterfly flew into the studio, where it rested on Whitman's finger in this one beautiful moment caught on camera. I'm how do I turn those off? As much as Walt himself would claim the moment was genuine, people who were actually there were like, no, we just tied a cloth butterfly to his finger. That's a little sad. In 1882, Walt Whitman got a notice that he was being sued by the Boston District Attorney because Leaves of Grass violated obscenity laws. For this, the DA called in the New England Society for the Suppression of Vice. Much like the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice, which was created in 1873, the New England chapter was just a few years old at this point and ready to sink their teeth into whatever came before them. In a way, they were actually much harsher than the New York chapter.
Because they had something to prove.
Yeah, as they would go backwards in time to try attacking books that were sometimes hundreds of years old. They even put Francois Rabelais' Gargantua and Pantagruel on trial. So yeah, not too far off. They went back a few hundred years to be like, there's too much piss in this, which really makes it the classic of its time, and Boston can still go get fucked. You gave us the Suppression of Vice, and you gave us Mark Wahlberg. Go fuck yourself, Boston. But it would turn out to be so easy to get in trouble with the New England Society for the Suppression of Vice that it soon became a moniker for things that were cool, saying things were, quote, banned in Boston. It was just like getting a parental advisory sticker on your album.
Nice.
Yeah, and because of that, once Leaves of Grass hit the stand, the sales skyrocketed once more.
Everybody's spite bought it.
Oh, yeah, everyone was like, fuck
Except
yeah,
now
dude.
the spite was directed towards Boston.
I mean, but you got to remember, the first time he published this was it was decades ago. Now he's an old fucking man, and it's like, it had its time to now become punk rock, you know? Yeah. Or the boring version of punk rock to a lot of these oldsters. Now, it was around this time that Walt's 55-year-old brother George decided to move on from Camden, specifically to another suburb of New Jersey called Burlington, where he had bought a nice little slice of land and was setting up a farm for himself and even thought to build a space specifically for Walt. However, Walt had grown attached to Camden and refused to move.
Uh-oh.
George, of course, was like, buddy, you're partially paralyzed. You can't fucking work.
Ask, like,
how the hell are you going to say no?
Still?
Yeah. But the 65-year-old Walt moved into a small, dilapidated apartment building and somewhat forced the other tenants to take care of him instead.
Wow. That is wretched.
He is kind of like Henry Darger.
God.
Like, it was nothing super major, but I'm sure they had to get groceries and stuff for him. One of his friends actually called it, quote, the worst house in the worst situated. But Walt was kind of used to living in filth. One of the things Oscar Wilde said about that fateful afternoon was that when Walt showed him his bedroom, it was covered in dust and newspapers, and he had to weigh his options on where to even sit. Either way, Walt's arrangement with the other tenants of this building was short-lived, as Walt soon purchased the building outright for $1,750, about $53,000 today, and he just let the other tenants stay.
Oh.
Meanwhile, there was
in a good way then.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there was a widow that lived a couple blocks away looking for work, and Walt was like, fuck it, live with me. I'll give you free rent and you can just be my housekeeper.
Yeah.
So she did.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it works out great.
So all right.
So for the rest of his life, Walt Whitman lived at 330 Mickle Street, what is today Martin Luther King Boulevard, where if you wanted, you could walk past and see the great American poet on his front porch in a rocking chair, napping in the sun with his shirt fully open. Now,
after that big old beefy dinner.
Just filled with beef and homemade wine. Just, God. Yeah, he's just dying,
how to be
dude.
a healthy man. Eat all that meat. Sunbathe nude.
Now, could Walt Whitman afford all this? Well, not really. Although Leaves of Grass had been rightly given its due for the last 15 years, he was not making all that much from royalties. However, people loved Walt Whitman enough that they would just show up to give him money if it meant they got to meet him. And he'd gladly hang out even if you didn't have anything on you.
Oh.
In 1884, he even managed to rake up enough money to build a summer home in South Jersey where he'd once again make contribution to Leaves of Grass.
Nice. Nice.
Actually, yeah.
Is this like the last round of...
It is, yes.
And the definitive...
I gotta say, this is kind of like how William S. Burroughs somehow managed to survive like the last 20 years of his life. Was just like,
the kindness of
I'm
strangers.
just gonna show up to his place at the Y camp and just fucking...
just be cool.
I'm gonna give him heroin. And he's just
Goddamn.
like... Just everyone's feeding this 80-year-old man heroin, and he's just like, oh, okay. What the fuck is Nirvana? All right, cool, I guess. In 1891, at 72 years old, Walt Whitman wrote to a friend that he had been working on Leaves of Grass all his life, even if he'd intended the 1867 edition to be the last version. Instead, he now saw his work as, quote, at last complete, after 33 years of hackling at it, all times and moods of my life, fair weather and foul, all parts of the land, and peace and war, young and old. In January the next year, the New York Herald ran its ad, quote, Walt Whitman wishes respectfully to notify the public that the book Leaves of Grass, which he has been working on at great intervals and partially issued for the past 35 or 40 years, is now completed, so to call it, and he would like this new 1892 edition to absolutely supersede all previous ones. Faulty as it is, he decides it as, by far, his special and entire self-chosen poetic utterance. Whereas the original Leaves of Grass was only 12 poems long, with its author only known by the lithograph etching of a young man with a crooked hat, the last edition was now almost 400 poems long and featured a photograph of the old, long-haired man that Whitman had become. What's interesting is that when you look at the first poems included in Leaves of Grass all the way back in 1855, they were all about the freedom of being young and able to explore, whereas the mood seemed to somber in Whitman's later years, and his poetry seemed to gravitate more toward death. Fittingly, the final version of Leaves of Grass was referred by Walt Whitman as the Deathbed Edition.
Nice.
Knowing the end was near, Whitman commissioned a $4,000 granite mausoleum shaped kind of like a house. I would like to remind you, this is like 3 times more than what he paid for a fully functioning building to live in.
Oh.
Let me show
True.
you. Whitman grave.
Show me.
How do you feel about that? It looks like trolls made it.
It's very Flintstone chic.
It's not good.
Like,
I don't like it.
He did not get his money's worth.
I think it was in the pure cost of labor to lift these things alone. I don't know, dude. Like,
God.
But during its construction, Walt would visit it often. He would also go to his birthplace in Huntington, New York, where he said he, quote, rode around all the old familiar spots, viewing and pondering and dwelling long upon them, everything coming back to me from 50 years. The final writings Walt Whitman would make in his letters and diaries are very sad. He was 72, but he functioned like he was 90. No one would know this until after the autopsy, which was performed at his home, but his lungs had shrunk due to some past bout of pneumonia.
Oh.
There was an abscess in his chest that eroded one of his fucking ribs, and his lungs were filled with fluid.
Jesus Christ, no wonder.
He was so fucking weak, he couldn't lift a fork. He wrote during his last week alive, quote, "I suffer all the time. I have no relief, no escape. It is monotony, 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 in pain." Walt Whitman died on March 26, 1892, at his home in Camden, New Jersey, about a month shy of his 73rd birthday. His body was immediately put on display in his home, where more than 1,000 people showed up in the first 3 hours alone. Even then, his coffin was so covered with flowers that most people couldn't even see his body after the first day. After 4 days, his oak coffin was brought to his weird little grave in Harley Cemetery. The remains of his parents, his siblings, and their families were also moved to the tomb beside him. After the gate was closed and the elegy said, "There was a fucking party, man. Live music, food, drinks. It was a fucking carnival, dude." Yeah. And somebody dug him up to make a sculpture of his face, but they fucking caught him.
Please tell me they did.
No.
You're just referencing the beginning of this episode.
Yes, it's called the callback.
Yeah, hell yeah, callback.
The only part of Walt Whitman not buried with him was his brain, as he had donated it.
He saved Whitman's brain.
As he had donated it to the American Anthropometric Society in Philly, because he was a huge believer in phrenology. You know, look at the bumps on the head and
bumps,
shit.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the way, someone at the lab fucking dropped his yoke and destroyed Walt Whitman's brain forever.
They broke Walt Whitman's brain.
The shitty sequel.
Direct DVD.
The only mention we have of what happened is from one paper in 1906 saying, quote, "The brain of Walt Whitman, together with the jar in which it had been placed, was said to have been dropped on the floor by careless assistant. Unfortunately, not even the pieces were saved." That's it. That's all we have.
What?
After Whitman's death, his old lover Pete Doyle was left a watch and an old worn coat of Whitman's, which Pete would often wear and referred to it as Aladdin's lamp, since when worn, he could still smell his old lover on it.
Aww.
I know. It's sad. When he showed up to pay his respects at Walt's house, the Whitman family almost didn't let him in the door. We're not entirely sure why. Doyle,
they're homophobic.
It very well could have just been that. I mean, at that point, people thought it could be taught out of people, and they're like, "You were enabling him, dude. Like, what?"
He learned it from you.
It could be. Doyle later produced a book of their letters called Calamus, a series of letters. Yeah, hell yeah. a series of letters written during the years 1868 to 1880 by Walt Whitman to a young friend, Peter Doyle. People didn't like it. Seemed a little too gay. Doyle,
it's not gay enough.
It wasn't gay. Make it gayer. Doyle died at age 63 on April 19th, 1907, and was buried in a separate cemetery in D.C. Mm-hmm. The oldest photograph we have of Walt Whitman with another person was taken sometime around their meeting in 1865, showing Whitman and Doyle sitting in two opposite chairs, but smiling and looking thoughtfully into each other's eyes. The home where Walt Whitman lived in his final years is known as the Walt Whitman House and is dedicated to the poet's life, even showing off the bed he died in and the death notice that the city taped to the front door. The spot where the two Scottish men published Leaves of Grass is now an apartment complex called the Walt Whitman Residence Apartments. The house where he was born is, of course, a museum as well. There's a Walt Whitman Bridge built in 1957 outside Camden, which some people were mad about because they thought Walt Whitman was a communist. Okay.
Okay. Sure.
And speaking of which, years later, long after Leaves of Grass had proven itself an American classic, someone asked Whitman's old boss at the Department of the Interior, James Harlan, if he stood by firing Walt. He said he did, but only because they didn't need his position anymore, not that he hated him for being a pervert. So he's a fucking liar.
Yeah.
Walt Whitman had a complicated relationship with his audience. He was first hated when his book came out, then loved once Ralph Waldo Emerson said a few things, then hated again when more people read his work, then loved again after decades of revising it. But when he passed, he had several fans that knew him only because they'd heard about Walt Whitman all their life. After his death, some wondered if his legacy would even last. But in fact, his popularity would only grow. Along came a company out of Kansas called Little Blue Books in 1919. They started printing small editions of classic works, essays, and poems in these little booklets that could easily fit in your pocket. They started showing up in the pockets of workers and businessmen alike because, hell, they were cheap. They were even called the Henry Ford of literature by one newspaper. And although people couldn't see it at the time, the little blue books were pushing an agenda. They were publishing the works of people like W.E.B. Du Bois, Henry David Thoreau, and of course, Walt Whitman, all of which were socialist.
It all comes back. Not the socialist part, but the little pocketbook part.
Yeah.
Well, they've done it. They've shrunken a 400-page book.
No, it was like, Oh, Captain, My Captain, and other stories. Like, no, they did not condense it.
So they made a compilation.
They did, yeah.
Greatest hits.
Yeah. Well, J. Edgar Hoover caught on, and the FBI arrested the maker of the Little Blue Books, but the idea was copied by other companies, like the Little Leather Library, which I have several copies of.
Nice. I see. Yep.
Yep.
The little green
you see
boys.
them, and they stink to high hell.
They do.
I
do not touch them.
They're gross.
I do not touch them.
They kind of crumple. It's kind of nasty. But regardless, people in the 20th century had gotten their first taste of Whitman's work, and he was popular enough that the government reproduced some of his poems to give to American troops during World War II, with the idea that they would be inspired by his patriotic subjects. As a matter of fact, I bring to you perhaps Walt Whitman's most important contribution to the world, his poem Pioneers, O Pioneers, about the expanse of the American West, which was the influence to the 1913 title, O Pioneers, by none other than Willa Cather.
Oh.
Fuck you, it all comes back to her.
Hey-o.
My sources today. Leaves of Grass, review by Calvin Beach, listed as Juliet H. Beach. Originally printed in the New York Saturday Press, June 2nd, 1860, whitmanarchive.org. Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, Bantam Books, November 2004. Oscar Wilde and Walt Whitman once spent an afternoon together. Here's what happened. By David M. Friedman, October 17th, 2014, newrepublic.com.
Just one afternoon.
One sweaty, cummy afternoon. A study of the brains of 6 eminent scientists and scholars belonging to the American Anthropometric Society, together with a description of the skull of Professor E.D. Cope by Edward Anthony Spitzka, M.D. It's EDW with a dot on it. That's not an abbreviation for some weird doctor I never heard of, right?
I don't know.
I think it's Edward Anthony Spitzka. Either way, originally published March 16th, 1906, JSTOR.org, and Wikipedia.
Hell yeah, Wikipedia.
Hell yeah. Gotta fuck that bus driver. That's what it's all about. He just might be your biggest fan. You ever read Whitman's works or anything? Did they ever force that on you in school?
No.
Yeah, me neither. I was dumb enough to
I
be like...
I knew Oh, Captain, My Captain from, like I said, the Dead Poets Society.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I was dumb enough to immediately go out for the Deathbed Definitive Edition or whatever. I was like, ooh, the unabridged, and it's fucking thick. And that took actually many years to get through because I was just like, I'm kind of tired of reading Walt Whitman.
That is, I guess it's interesting though. Like you were able to follow it from like young poet to old man.
Yeah, that is the interesting part.
And he lived a lot longer than I thought he would.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Being
like,
a poet.
I don't know. Well, and just, I don't know, for the time period, like you said, people were just dying of simple infections.
Yeah. Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. There are many authors that we have covered from the 1800s that definitely did die much quicker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ones that born in the 1980s that died a lot quicker than that too. But anyway. But hell yeah. Nice job. We did it.